Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. A very special guest is here with us today. We have Oz Noy in the studio. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's actually an honor to have you here working on a new album, right?
Correct.
Yeah, with Will Lee on bass and Steve Ferroni on drums and Jerry Z.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're also doing a masterclass in the studio in the context of...
Yeah, we're in the middle of it actually, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the new album. What's the direction?
I have this band called the Boogaloo Experience Band. And it's kind of like a Boogaloo album. It's gonna be like that. It's kind of like the 70s when jazz meet funk and groove and stuff like that, and it gets electrified a little bit. So that's basically it. It's probably gonna be the closest to a jazz record I've ever made in a way.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first session out of 3. It's gonna be spread throughout the year. I don't know yet. So this is like the first one I'm doing.
Right.
And it's fun as hell.
Right, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So when you're doing that, when you're anticipating there'll be several sessions, do you start to try to get all of the basic tracks, or do you take a song and try to work it through and then move on to the next
No,
song?
I record, the way I record my record, I think of my record as jazz records, although nobody's really swinging a lot. It's more electrified and more like groove-wise, but I record like a jazz record, like old school jazz. We're in the room and we're all playing together, you know, to get the interaction. Usually, there's not many overdubs, if at all. The solos are never overdubbed. I edit stuff to kind of fix things and to make things work, choose takes. Like we do a lot of takes. So it's kind of more about to make everything sound good, not just the drums or just the bass. It's like it has to be a performance of the whole band. That's why I never go in the studio and record before playing live. Usually, every record I've done so far, I've been playing the music for a month to a year before, you know? So when I go to in the studio, there's nothing to rehearse. We just go and we try to get the best takes, you know?
Right.
Which, believe it or not, even if you're playing every week and you're playing the music every week, it always takes time in the studio to get it, you know? But you play with a click and then, you know, you just got to get used to the environment. So.
Right.
It's always challenging. I don't know. It's almost like every time I'm doing a record, I'm like, damn, I haven't figured it out yet.
Right.
You know?
So is this the group of musicians then you've been playing these out live with?
Well, Will Lee and Jerry Z I've been playing with live. Steve Ferroni, I've played a lot with him. We played some of the stuff, but not all of it. But this music is really, really simple. And we rehearse, you know, and stuff. So he's the only guy that's a little new to the music, but again, I play with him a lot.
Right.
And I know and again, at least this bunch of tunes that we're doing, they're really simple.
Right.
So I knew immediately, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer with him, you know, I know what I'm going to get out of him.
Right.
You know, so that's pretty much it.
Right.
But I've been playing that music, and the rest of the music for the album really, already been playing live for a couple of months.
Right. I'm curious how... You mentioned the music is fairly simple, but when you solo and when you play on top of those tracks, you take things out and you'll work different kind of harmonic structures. How do you think of that in relation to, say, a basic set of chord changes? Are you thinking of superimposing chords on top of that? Are you looking at altered scales, or how do you think about that?
All of what you said. You know, I don't really think about it anymore. I kind of play a certain way, and to me, superimposing or altered chords or altered scale, all that stuff, I don't think about this stuff. It's like I have the set of skills and like scales and arpeggios and whatever that I'm used to, that I know how to do. And I'm trying to kind of play with my ear, but also I have what I have as a player. And I don't know, I just play melodies really.
Right.
You know, and what I like is when you're talking about simple chords, I actually like that the background behind me, like the rhythm section behind me and the chords are not too fancy. That way when I play my stuff, it's somehow more clear, you know what I mean? Like when the chords are complicated, the playing is complicated, everything's complicated, I don't necessarily like that kind of music, so...
Right. So one of the challenges when you do take things outside, regardless of the chords that are underneath, is getting back inside, so it sounds like it resolves. Do you have techniques that you're looking for? Are you looking for chord tones, or how do you approach that?
You can say chord tones is the safest bet. Like you can... Anything... If you start a line, anything in the middle is kind of it could be anything as long as you resolve it, as long as like you land down on your feet. And normally that's, you know, there's no exact rules. You can end on the 4 and it will sound fine, but normally if you want to be safe, you end on one of the chord notes. You know?
Right, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So let's take a step back. My understanding is you started playing sessions at age 12 in Israel, is that right?
Yeah, maybe like more 13 or
13.
15. Yeah,
you're old.
Yeah, I know. It was weird.
So how did you get into that? You started playing at age 10, is that right?
I started to play when I was 10, and I got a kind of a young band when I was 12 or 11. And then one of the guys, or two of the guys, or maybe a few of them, we had like a little producer kind of guy that wrote the songs. So he started to do sessions, and then he opened a studio in my city where I was from Israel. So I started to do those quirky, weird sessions when I was really young.
Right.
Kind of abusive a little bit. But it was cool, you know, it's like great. Like you start to play with a click, and you start to realize what it is to play in a studio and to play a guitar part. And I wasn't really aware of the sound, you know what I mean? It's like whatever I had, I just play it.
Right, right.
So, yeah.
You've talked about how around age 15 or 16, you really got into bebop and started
Yes.
kind of focusing on that in your language, but you were still playing metal, you're still working in blues and some funk things. How did you start to integrate that bebop language into those other styles?
You know, I always loved, because I was doing studio work, and I always loved pop music. Like I always listened to the Beatles. That's what got me starting, you know? And then pop songs, tunes and stuff. So till today, I love that stuff. So I could never like separate it. And I remember growing up when I started to study jazz, everybody was to tell me, oh, you can't do both. You know, you can't. You just have to decide. And I was luckily stubborn enough, even if I didn't know much, to go like, no, I'm just going to do what I like. It actually took many years till it all came together into one thing. Like in the 80s, when I grew up, it was really schizophrenic because I was playing shredding stuff because shredding was what was going on. And then I was studying bebop and jazz, so it was like complete, you know, opposites. Like I had a jazz guitar, like an Epiphone L5, and then I had like a Charvel or something, you know.
Right.
But I really love that stuff. I still love it till this day, you know. I really appreciate people that play, you know, that kind of stuff. So
sure.
It started to come together more in the early 90s where I kind of started, my jazz playing started to kind of get a little more, I wouldn't say modern, but I got a little more, you know, more into Jim Hall and people like that that kind of opened the doors. I was always into the modern guys like Pat Metheny and Schofield and Stern and all those guys. But, and I tried to play like that when I started, but I was lucky enough to have a teacher that told me, hey, if you want to play that stuff, you have to study the basics of jazz. And then I had another teacher that actually took it one step further, go like, if you want to play jazz, you have to study the language, which is bebop. So I was, I guess I was young enough to kind of believe them, you know what I mean? And even if at the time I didn't really love bebop, I got into it. And then I was a Wes Montgomery clone for a long time. So once I got out of the Wes Montgomery clone thing, I started to get into the more modern guys that I like. And that's when I started to also get into blues. Like Stevie Ray Vaughan was really big at the time. And I discovered Eric Johnson and all those guys. So I think that was the beginning of like kind of gluing it all together. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then another thing that was fun is, I think the thing that really put everything together was when I moved to New York, I moved in with my Strat and with my, I had a 175. And at the time, after a year or two, maybe 2 or 3 years in New York, I started to play with Gavin DeGraw, the pop singer.
Sure.
And it was before he was famous. It was like the 2 years before he got signed. And we were doing this steady gig every Monday night at a club. That's where he was discovered. And it was me and him, and I was playing acoustic guitar. So I needed an acoustic guitar. So I took my 175 hollow body guitar to Rudy's, and I did a swap for an acoustic guitar, and that's actually the most important move I've ever done musically, because then I didn't have a jazz guitar anymore.
Right.
So I was like, all right, so from now on it's all on my Strat. And that really put everything together.
Right, right.
And that's kind of where I started my band, really. What I'm doing now is still the same, you know, concept.
Right, right. You're I've predominantly seen you playing a Strat, but on Who Gives a Funk and some of your other records, you've brought in some other
I played
instruments as well.
Telly's a bunch. I played a Les Paul on the last record, the Who Gives a Funk record. I played half of the record is actually a Les Paul.
Yeah, right.
A couple of tracks on the Gretsch.
What were you looking for in choosing those guitars?
A change.
Yeah.
I I had a Les Paul for a while, but to me, I'm not one of those guys that have a bunch of guitars, and to me it takes me a while to learn an instrument. And when I first got a Telly, it took me a year to get it,
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with the Les Paul. It took me a long time, and the Les Paul is so different than a Fender guitar.
Sure.
And I played a humbucker guitar, but there's something about the way that Les Paul reacts and the way the tone projects and the whole thing is so different. So I played it a few years before I had the balls to actually record with it,
Right.
But then once the sound came together, then I was like, okay, this has this character, Telly's got a character, Strat got its character, Gretsch got a character. So once I felt comfortable with that, then it's almost like I don't write music and thinking about the guitars I'm going to play, but a lot of things just kind of make sense once you have a tune. You go like, oh, this is definitely a Strat.
Right.
This is definitely a Telly. So that's kind of how it came together.
Mm-hmm. And what is your writing process like? Do you start with a riff? Do you start with a melody, a progression?
Well, painful. That's what my writing process is.
Right.
No, what I do is I only write when I have to because I don't find it enjoyable. I'm not one of those guys that will wake up in the morning and have the tune yesterday in his head, like Paul McCartney, you know what I mean?
Right.
But what I usually do is anything that I find to be cool, whether it's a drum groove, a bass line or a guitar line, I just record on a little recorder. And when I need to do a record, I usually have a concept for a record before I do it. Then I start looking around with what I have. And then I can develop a drum groove, I can develop a bass line, I can develop a chord progression,
Right.
And usually it takes a while. Like I can have things sit on my desk for like a year,
Right.
But I just kind of, like every step of the way, like if you have a drum groove, it opens a little door. If you have a bass groove, it opens a little door. A lot of times I just try to write in little pieces because I can't just sit and wait for something to,
Right.
So sometimes it just takes a while and sometimes it's quick. But normally it's just, I just let it happen within as long as it needs to happen,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So when you do a record like Who Gives a Funk, which I thought was one of the great records of 2016, and I thought that was wonderful. It's a more arranged record. You had trombone on there. You had a lot of guest artists and horn section and keyboards. But you typically are playing a lot of times with a smaller ensemble. How do you take those songs onto the stage then once you've recorded them with all that arrangement?
Well, the Who Gives a Funk was the first record that I had a horn section. You can do it without a horn section when you play live.
Mm-hmm.
It's, there's some essential parts that actually the organ player plays live, know. And, I used to play in New York a bunch where sometimes when Lou Soloff, the great Lou Soloff, was still around, he would come and hang out, so he played trumpet. If there's a saxophone player, they'll come and sit in. So I had a little bit of that, but I never did the whole thing with the horns. It's just too complicated.
Right.
But a lot of that, solo-wise, if you play without a horn player or somebody else solo.
Mm-hmm.
The parts, some of them are just kind of background parts, so, it works out. I wish I could have a horn section.
Right,
awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
When Jimmy Haslip was here recently, he was, I think the day after he was here.
Yeah, we went on tour.
He was going on tour with Keith Carlock on drums, and now you have Willie, Steve Ferroni.
Yes.
You've worked with Vinnie Colaiuta, so many great bands. How does it change your playing when you're working with these different musicians backing you up?
I don't know how it changed my playing.
Yeah?
I get different inspiration when I play with them because it feels different. And each of them takes it to a different place. Although it could be the same tune, the same groove, but still everybody's going to sound different.
Mm-hmm.
I think I kind of sound the same, but I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
Right. So you just kind of do what you do, and it works with...
Yeah, I think it's different dynamics with certain players. Like Keith's got a different dynamic from Wecco, and Wecco's got a different dynamic from Vinnie. So it's just like changes. Like it's not necessarily changed the way I play; it changed the way the music sounds in general.
Okay.
Like just the kind of the dynamic of the music, and that's a big part of everybody's playing really, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So what do you look for when you're choosing a musician to be in your band?
Well, first of all, I don't want to sound like I'm above certain players, but I like to use the originals. Meaning, I don't like to use somebody that sounds like Vinnie. I like to use Vinnie.
Sure.
Same with Weckel or all those guys. So to me, the guys that I play with are original, meaning like Steve Ferroni only sounds like Steve Ferroni. That's it. That's the guy. That's, you know. Same thing with Carlock. Same thing with Anton Fig. And so that's kind of really important to me because that's where you really get the character of the players. Same thing with Willie, James Genus, I don't know, Daryl Jones, John Petitucci, you know. So that's what I like. It's not that I don't play with other people, but when I do my own thing, I like that kind of character because that gives the music a very strong character, you know.
Right. So are you giving them pretty specific instructions? Do you give them charts, or do you just?
Well, what I do is when I write, I make demos in my house. Very, very demos.
Okay.
Really not great. But what I do is I program the drum beats to what I think is the beat. I usually write the bass lines, and then the rest is just like the melodies or chords. And I write a very, very basic charts that everybody uses the same chart.
Okay.
And then they make the part their own. So there is a drum part or a bass part, and then you know they'll make it sound their own because they're so original with the way they play.
Right.
They just got a strong sound, you know. So that's how it happens.
Right.
And then when I make records, I do think about especially drummers, because you know, like drums is really the main sound of your band. It's like it really starts with drums. You know what I mean? So it's really important to get the right drummer for tunes that I write.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of all these great musicians that you've worked with, when I have someone on your level, a very high-level musician here, I always like to ask, what is it that makes a great musician?
Oh. Yeah, actually, all the great musicians that I know, that I work with, are all great people, you know? I don't like arrogancy in the playing. And everybody's really dedicated, I guess, you know? So.
Right.
And everybody has to be open. Like, you have to be open, no attitude, no nothing. Even if I ask the drummer or the bass player to do something, it's not what I want. You know, you just have to be open.
Right.
And I think the rest just happens because you speak the same language, you know?
It's interesting when I ask that question, so often I get answers that aren't related to necessarily technique or musical knowledge.
Not.
Things. It's so much more about the personalities.
Yeah, it's, you know, there's a connection that happens when you play. I'll give you the perfect example. I played with Anton Fig and Will Leaf since, like, steady, like the last 2 years, maybe not as much, but steady since 2001. So it's like almost 15 years. So we made a bunch of records together. So recently, Anton's been on tour with Joe Bonamassa, and Will's really busy. So, and I do different bands too, just to kind of make different things happen. So.
Sure.
Recently, we did a gig at the Bitter End. I do this Mondays at the Bitter End in New York. And I just called them. I was like, you want to do a gig? And we haven't played together in, I think, 2 years. Like, I play with Will a bunch, but we haven't done this. And we did it, and we didn't do any rehearsal or anything. And we just went to play, and I asked Anton, and Will was like, which tunes do you want to play? And we just put a list together. We went on stage, and we started playing. We didn't talk, nothing. And it just felt like we just played yesterday.
Wow.
So that kind of that made me feel like this is like probably the greatest achievement of my life, to get to such deep connection with musician. And it would be the same if I'll do it with Carlock, with Keith. It would be the same if I do it with Weckel. You know, because it's just like you get, and James Genesis, those are the main guys I use for the most part for years, you know. And it's just like when you hit a certain level, I think it just stays there, you know. You get this connection. You know they have your back, and you just play. It's there. Right,
that's awesome.
It's really awesome, you know?
Yeah, that's just wonderful. So we talked about Who Gives a Funk, but you've done a record since then. Tell us about that.
Well, this new thing that just came out, it's a band called Oz Noy Squeeze. And what this thing is, over the years, I always been playing with singers, mostly in New York, you know?
Right.
And the guy from my record company, asked me for years. I was like, "Hey man, you got to do something with a singer. Got to do something with a singer." So this year I wasn't releasing one of my solo albums, so we thought that was a good time to do it. So again, I've been doing it for years, just locally.
Right.
And I found this guy that's extraordinary on YouTube. Really, his name is Ray Thistlethwaite. He's Australian singer-songwriter. He's actually he's got a pretty successful rock band in Australia that he's like the main singer and writer, and he lives in LA. And I found him on YouTube, and he plays left-hand synth bass and keyboard, and sings, and he's absolutely extraordinary. So I called him. I was like, "Hey man, I want to do something. Would you be into it?" And he was into it. And then we got this drummer from Atlanta, Darren Stanley. And we got a bunch of tunes. Some of them are covers, some of them are his tunes, Ray's tunes. And the idea behind this, I call it my pop jam band, because it's kind of a little bit like a pop record, but we play live and we stretch it out and we solo and stuff. And we did this record. We just finished a tour in the U.S., supposed to go to Asia next year, and it's pretty cool. The record is called Oz Noy Squeeze. The band is called Oz Noy Squeeze. That was just released, and it's a cool thing. I actually really dig it.
Yeah, I saw that just came out a few weeks ago as we're doing this interview.
Yeah.
And actually, I was curious. I haven't heard it yet, but I noticed there was no bass player credited. So I was wondering how you were doing that.
He plays really, really good synth bass. It's
Nice.
really, really freaky.
Right.
And the other thing is we tracked it the way I track my jazz records. We played live. There's no overdub. The only thing he overdubbed actually was some of the vocals because of just sound issues and stuff. But everything is all left-hand keyboard. Some of the vocals, drums, guitars, all live.
Right. Nice.
So I like that kind of, to get this kind of, cohesive, like organic sound,
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't wait to check it out. Oz Noy Squeeze is the new record. Thanks so much for coming in and taking time with us today.
Yeah,
I know the Masterclass is going great. We're excited about the new album you're recording here as well. So you got lots going on.
I guess.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cool.
And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, more amps, more effects, and we'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.